Something satisfying is unfolding in Cleveland, and almost nobody noticed when it started. There was no press conference, no trade announcement dominating headlines, no viral moment that made everyone stop scrolling. Instead, it happened in the places cameras rarely reach: meeting rooms where film gets dissected play by play, practice fields where reps accumulate without fanfare, private conversations between coaches that never get quoted publicly. And now, whispers are starting to leak out. The kind that make people inside NFL buildings lean forward and pay closer attention. Because what's taking shape with the Browns doesn't look like another false start. It doesn't feel like the familiar cycle of hope and disappointment this franchise has endured for decades. This feels different, quieter, steadier, more real than anything Cleveland has experienced at quarterback in a very long time. The name at the center of it all is Shedeur Sanders. And before anyone rushes to conclusions or dismisses this as premature hype, understand something important. This isn't about crowning a starter. This isn't about declaring a winner before the competition finishes. This is about patterns forming, signals emerging, and an organization that's been burned repeatedly starting to believe again. To truly understand why this moment matters, you have to understand what Cleveland has endured at the quarterback position. The Browns haven't just struggled to find their guy. They've become the cautionary tale every other franchise studies when discussing how not to handle the most important position in professional sports. Since returning to the league in 1999, Cleveland has cycled through more starting quarterbacks than almost any team in football history. The names blur together after a while. High draft picks who never developed. Free agent signings who were supposed to bring stability, but exposed how unstable everything truly was. Journeymen who provided brief hope before reality returned with familiar disappointment. The emotional toll on fans has been immense and cumulative. Every offseason arrived with new optimism. Every regular season ended with the same hollow feeling. People in Cleveland learned to protect themselves emotionally. They stopped buying jerseys with quarterback names on the back because those names would inevitably change. They stopped believing the promises and the potential because they'd heard it all before. The cycle repeated so many times that cynicism became the default setting for anyone following this team. Inside the organization, the damage ran even deeper. Coaches lost jobs because quarterback gambles didn't pay off. General managers staked their futures on prospects who couldn't handle the pressure. Scouts questioned their own evaluations after watching talented arms fail to translate. The scars accumulated over years, influencing how every subsequent decision got made. Trust became the scarcest commodity in that building. Nobody wanted to get burned again, so everybody approached quarterback evaluation with maximum skepticism. That history created an environment where earning belief takes longer than anywhere else in the league. Cleveland isn't a place where hype carries weight. It's a place where hype gets examined, questioned, and usually dismissed until proven otherwise. Coaches don't praise publicly because they've seen how quickly praise turns into pressure. Executives don't commit early because early commitment has backfired repeatedly. The franchise learned through painful experience that patience isn't just a virtue at quarterback. It's a survival mechanism. The failures weren't always about talent either. Some quarterbacks who struggled in Cleveland went on to find success elsewhere. That pattern raised uncomfortable questions about the organization itself. Was the environment too unstable for development? Were the supporting pieces insufficient? Did the constant coaching changes prevent anyone from building real momentum? The answers varied depending on who you asked, but the outcome remained consistent. Cleveland couldn't keep a quarterback long enough to find out what he could actually become. This context explains why skepticism still dominates conversations about any new quarterback hope. Fans have been fooled too many times. The organization has invested too heavily in wrong answers. Every promise of a new era rings hollow until proven otherwise through sustained performance. That's not negativity. That's learned behavior. That's a fan base and a franchise protecting themselves from the disappointment they know too well. The weight of that history hangs over everything happening right now. When coaches evaluate Shedeur Sanders, they're not just measuring throws and decisions. They're measuring whether this could finally be different. When teammates observe his daily habits, they're comparing them to the habits of quarterbacks who came before and fell short. When front office executives discuss his future, they're calculating risks through the lens of every previous gamble that didn't work. Breaking through that skepticism requires something beyond talent. It requires consistency that can't be dismissed. It requires composure that holds up under examination. It requires leadership that earns trust rather than demanding it. And it requires time, because trust in Cleveland doesn't come quickly. It comes grudgingly, through repetition, through proof, through showing up the same way every single day until even the most skeptical observers have to acknowledge what they're seeing. That's the mountain any quarterback has to climb in this city. The Browns don't hand out belief. They make you earn it through an accumulation of evidence that becomes impossible to ignore. Past quarterbacks failed that test for various reasons. Some lacked the mental makeup. Others couldn't handle the pressure of expectations. A few simply weren't talented enough despite promising moments. What makes the current situation so intriguing is that someone appears to be climbing that mountain without fanfare. Not through splash plays or viral moments. Not through bold proclamations or manufactured drama. Just through daily work that's starting to register with people who have been trained to doubt everything they see. And in Cleveland, where skepticism is the default and disappointment is familiar, that quiet accumulation of trust might be the most meaningful signal of all. But the question remains, is this actually different, or is this just another chapter in a story that always ends the same way? Before examining what's happening inside the Browns facility, understanding who Shedeur Sanders actually is matters more than most people realize. This isn't a typical quarterback prospect with a typical background. He carries a name that guarantees attention before he ever takes a snap. His father, Shedeur Sanders, stands among the most iconic athletes in American sports history. That pedigree creates expectations and pressure that most players never have to navigate. Every throw gets analyzed through a different lens. Every decision gets scrutinized more heavily. The spotlight doesn't wait for you to earn it. It finds you immediately, whether you're prepared for it or not. Lesser players would have crumbled under that weight. The constant comparisons, the assumptions about why opportunities came his way, the whispers questioning whether talent or last name opened doors. Others might have leaned into the celebrity aspect, chasing attention rather than mastering fundamentals. Sanders did neither. He put his head down and got to work with a focus that separated him from the noise surrounding his situation. At Colorado, his development wasn't linear, but it was undeniable. Each season brought refinement in areas that matter at the next level. His accuracy became sharper and more consistent across different areas of the field. His decision-making speed improved, allowing him to process information faster and deliver the ball before windows closed. His understanding of defensive structures grew more sophisticated, enabling him to identify coverage rotations and exploit weaknesses that less experienced quarterbacks miss entirely. Scouts studying his tape noticed traits that translate directly to professional football. His release is quick and compact, limiting exposure to pass rushers and allowing throws into tight windows. His pocket presence reflects unusual maturity, with calm movements that maximize protection rather than creating unnecessary chaos. His leadership shows up not just in what he says publicly, but in how teammates respond when cameras aren't rolling. Those attributes don't generate viral highlights or dominate social media feeds. They generate wins and sustained success at the highest levels of football. What separates Sanders from many quarterback prospects his age is emotional control under pressure. Young quarterbacks typically ride emotional waves throughout games and seasons. Good performances create overconfidence. Bad performances create spirals that take days to escape. Sanders maintains equilibrium regardless of circumstances. His demeanor after a 3-and-out looks remarkably similar to his demeanor after a touchdown drive. That steadiness matters because NFL defenses hunt for emotional weakness. They attack quarterbacks who unravel after adversity. They exploit panic and frustration. Sanders doesn't provide those openings. His football IQ impressed evaluators who studied him closely. Understanding concepts isn't the same as executing them under pressure, and Sanders demonstrated both capabilities consistently. He made protection adjustments that reflected genuine comprehension of defensive schemes. He identified blitz indicators before the snap and adjusted routes accordingly. He communicated clearly with receivers about option routes, ensuring everyone operated from the same page. Those details don't show up in box scores, but they determine whether offenses function smoothly or struggle with preventable breakdowns. The criticism that followed Sanders throughout his college career often focused on competition level. Playing in a conference with defensive weaknesses raised questions about how his performance would translate against elite opponents. Those questions weren't unreasonable. Every prospect faces similar scrutiny about competition quality. What matters is how a player responds when the level increases. And Sanders consistently answered those questions with performances that silenced doubters, at least temporarily. His accuracy numbers stood among the best in college football during his time at Colorado. Completion percentage, touchdown to interception ratio, yards per attempt, the statistics painted a picture of efficiency and production. But numbers alone don't explain why NFL teams grew increasingly interested. The film explained it. The way he threw receivers open rather than waiting for separation. The way he delivered strikes to the back shoulder when coverage dictated that adjustment. The way he moved within the pocket to create angles instead of bailing at the first sign of pressure. Perhaps most importantly, Sanders demonstrated the ability to elevate those around him. Receivers posted career performances playing alongside him. Offensive linemen appeared more confident knowing their quarterback would deliver if they provided reasonable protection. The offense operated with rhythm and purpose that reflected leadership as much as scheme. Those intangible elements matter because football remains a team sport. Quarterbacks who make everyone better generate more organizational belief than quarterbacks who accumulate individual statistics. None of this guaranteed NFL success. The leap from college to professional football remains the most difficult transition in team sports. Speed increases, windows shrink. Defenders are faster, smarter, and more experienced. But the foundation Sanders brought to Cleveland wasn't theoretical. It was demonstrated repeatedly in environments that tested him. The question wasn't whether he had traits worth developing. The question was whether those traits would hold up under professional scrutiny. That question is being answered right now, in ways that don't make headlines but matter deeply inside NFL buildings. And the answer forming quietly might be more significant than anyone outside that building realizes. The most meaningful football evaluations never happen under stadium lights. They happen in facilities where cameras are rare and accountability is constant. Early morning film sessions where preparation habits reveal themselves. Practice reps where execution either matches or betrays what was discussed in meetings. Small moments throughout the day where professionalism either shines or slips. That's where trust forms at the NFL level. And that's where Shedeur Sanders has been making his strongest impression. From the beginning, Cleveland's approach was deliberately cautious. The organization had been burned too many times by premature optimism. They'd watched promising quarterbacks receive too much responsibility too quickly and collapse under expectations that outpaced development. So Sanders got treated like every other young quarterback entering the building. Same installation pace, same film expectations, same demanding standard with minimal margin for error. There would be no special treatment based on pedigree or preconceived notions. What started separating Sanders from the pack wasn't a single spectacular play or a scripted drill designed to showcase arm talent. It was consistency, the kind that reveals itself only through accumulation. Day after day, he showed up with identical focus. His preparation didn't fluctuate based on how previous practices went. His energy didn't rise and fall with external circumstances. He simply stacked days, each one looking remarkably similar to the one before, until the pattern became undeniable. Coaches noticed the details first. His command in the huddle reflected confidence without arrogance. He delivered plays with clarity that eliminated confusion and kept the offense operating on schedule. When adjustments were necessary at the line of scrimmage, he made them decisively rather than creating hesitation. Receivers knew where the ball would be. Linemen knew when urgency was required. The offense started functioning with a rhythm it hadn't displayed consistently in previous iterations. The veteran players responded next, and their response carried significant weight. Experienced professionals in NFL locker rooms don't hand out respect based on potential or reputation. They've seen too many highly regarded prospects flame out. What earns their trust is reliability, someone who makes their job easier. Someone who communicates clearly and takes ownership when things break down rather than searching for excuses. Gradually, the body language around Sanders shifted. Receivers began trusting timing routes would be delivered precisely. Linemen responded to his urgency with heightened effort. The collective energy elevated because leadership earned it. What impressed staff members most was Sanders' response to adversity during practice. Young quarterbacks typically struggle when plays don't work. They press, trying to force positive outcomes through improvisation or risk-taking. They carry frustration from failed reps into subsequent plays, compounding problems rather than resolving them. Sanders operated differently. Bad reps didn't linger. Mistakes got processed, corrected, and left behind immediately. He moved forward with the same calm whether the previous play succeeded or failed. That emotional regulation is extraordinarily rare and extraordinarily valuable. His film study habits matched his practice habits. Sanders arrived early and stayed late, not for show, but because understanding defenses required that investment. He asked questions that revealed genuine curiosity about schematic nuances. He connected concepts from film to execution on the field in ways that demonstrated real comprehension rather than memorization. Coaches could tell the difference, and they valued the former far more than the latter. The installation pace accelerated as trust grew. Responsibilities that typically get reserved for later stages of development started arriving earlier. More pre-snap freedom. More option routes requiring quarterback-receiver communication. More complex protections demanding accurate identification and adjustment. Sanders handled each expansion without regression. The growth wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was steady, incremental, and sustainable. Exactly what organizations want to see from quarterbacks they're seriously evaluating for leadership roles. Teammates began speaking about him differently in private conversations, not with the guarded optimism that typically accompanies new arrivals, with genuine belief that something different was happening. The locker room sensed a presence it hadn't felt at quarterback recently. Someone who treated the position as responsibility rather than entitlement. Someone who earned the right to lead through daily demonstration rather than assumption based on draft status or contract. None of this meant the competition was over or decisions were made. Cleveland's front office remained appropriately cautious publicly. The coaching staff continued evaluating all options without telegraphing conclusions. But inside the building, among people who spent every day watching these quarterbacks work, the conversation shifted in ways that couldn't be hidden forever. The question stopped being whether Sanders belonged. It became how far this could realistically go. That internal shift mattered more than any external speculation, because NFL decisions get made by people inside buildings, not people watching from outside. And the people inside Cleveland's building were seeing something that challenged their carefully maintained skepticism, something that looked different from past quarterback experiences, something that felt real. But practice evaluations only take you so far. Eventually, pressure arrives, defenses get complex, execution windows shrink, and that's when the truth about a quarterback reveals itself. There's always a moment in every quarterback evaluation where theory meets reality. Practice can reveal habits, tendencies, and potential, but it cannot replicate the chaos of actual competition. At some point, coaches need to see how a quarterback responds when the plan breaks, when protection fails, and when the defense stops being predictable. That moment arrived for Shedeur Sanders, and what happened confirmed what daily observations suggested. The game situations that tested Sanders weren't manufactured or simplified. He faced defensive schemes designed to confuse and disrupt. Blitzes arrived from unexpected angles. Coverage rotations happened after the snap, forcing real-time adjustments. The pocket collapsed faster than expected on multiple occasions. All the conditions that separate quarterbacks who belong from quarterbacks who look ready until tested showed up in full force. And Sanders responded by refusing to flinch. What stood out immediately wasn't spectacular arm talent or improvisational magic. It was discipline. When pressure arrived early, he didn't panic and throw into coverage. When reads weren't clean, he took what the defense offered rather than forcing something dangerous. When protection broke down, he protected the football instead of creating turnover opportunities for the opposition. Those decisions don't generate highlight reels, but they generate trust from coaches who understand how games get lost at this level. There were plays where nothing went right. Routes didn't develop on schedule. Timing got disrupted by defensive pressure arriving before anticipated. Blocking assignments failed, leaving Sanders exposed with no clean options. In those moments, lesser quarterbacks reveal their worst habits. They try to salvage broken plays by taking unnecessary risks. They fade backwards under pressure instead of stepping into throws. They compound problems with emotional responses that affect subsequent plays. Sanders did none of that. He made smart decisions consistently, even when smart decisions weren't the exciting choice. Coaches watching film noticed the absence of self-inflicted damage. Young quarterbacks typically provide free possessions through poor decisions under stress. Interceptions thrown into coverage that should never have been challenged. Sacks taken in situations where throwing the ball away was clearly the better option. Fumbles caused by holding the ball too long while waiting for something to develop. Sanders avoided those mistakes with a discipline that seemed beyond his experience level. The errors he made were correctable, schematic, fixable through teaching rather than concerning about fundamental decision-making. Equally important was how he managed the game emotionally during those pressure situations. Stalled drives didn't create visible frustration. Failed conversions didn't produce body language that infected the huddle. He maintained consistent tempo regardless of scoreboard or circumstances. That emotional steadiness matters enormously because football momentum shifts constantly. Teams need quarterbacks who stabilize rather than amplify the chaos. Sanders provided that stabilizing presence. The specific matchups that tested him most revealed important information about his processing speed. Against complex defensive looks, he identified the right read quickly enough to deliver the ball before windows closed. Against disguised coverages that revealed themselves late, he adjusted without hesitation or confusion. Those adjustments happen in fractions of seconds at this level, and they separate quarterbacks who can function from quarterbacks who struggle against professional competition. Sanders processed information at a speed that met the challenge. What made these performances particularly meaningful was the context surrounding them. Sanders wasn't playing with ideal conditions. The offensive line wasn't always dominant. The play calling wasn't always aggressive. The supporting cast wasn't always executing at peak levels. He had to function within imperfect circumstances, which is precisely what NFL quarterbacks face constantly. Perfect conditions rarely exist. Success requires functioning when things aren't clean, and Sanders demonstrated that capability repeatedly. By the time coaches finished reviewing the relevant tape, the evaluation had shifted in meaningful ways. Sanders was no longer being viewed as a developmental project requiring perfect conditions to succeed. He started being seen as someone who could function in imperfect ones and still keep the offense operating effectively. That distinction carries massive weight at the professional level. Teams cannot build around quarterbacks who only succeed when everything goes right. They need quarterbacks who can manage chaos. The staff discussions following those evaluations moved from theoretical potential to practical projection. Questions shifted from curiosity about ceiling to confidence about floor. The minimum they could expect from Sanders started looking higher than originally anticipated. And when an organization's floor expectations rise for a quarterback, everything else begins adjusting accordingly. Planning changes. Roster construction considerations shift. Timeline discussions accelerate. None of this meant declarations were coming or decisions were finalized. Cleveland's front office remained publicly cautious, as always, but the internal conversation had crossed a threshold that was difficult to reverse. Sanders had proven something that practice alone couldn't prove. He had demonstrated that when pressure arrived and stakes increased, his decision-making held firm. His composure remained steady. His execution matched his preparation. That proof doesn't guarantee anything about the future, but it answered questions that had to be answered before meaningful commitment could be considered. And with those questions answered, the path forward started looking clearer than it had in a very long time. When it comes to quarterbacks, Kevin Stefanski measures every word carefully. He's a coach who understands how quickly statements become headlines and how easily headlines become pressure that undermines development. He's lived through the consequences of overpromising at this position. He's seen how optimism expressed too early creates expectations that can crush young players before they're ready. So Stefanski learned to speak guardedly, revealing little publicly while evaluating rigorously behind closed doors. That's why his recent shift in tone, however subtle, carries significant weight. For most of his tenure in Cleveland, Stefanski's quarterback comments followed predictable patterns. competition, development, process. The same phrases repeated with minor variations, designed to protect the organization and its players from external pressure. Nothing specific enough to create expectations. Nothing definitive enough to suggest decisions were approaching. Safe, controlled professional messaging that revealed almost nothing about internal evaluations. Lately, that pattern has changed. Not dramatically, not in ways that generate headlines or force immediate conclusions, but noticeably for people who pay close attention to how coaches communicate. Stefanski has started pointing to specific traits when discussing the quarterback room. Consistency, preparation, leadership under pressure. Those aren't accidental word choices. Coaches at this level don't highlight specific qualities publicly unless they're seeing them demonstrated daily and trusting what they see. The specificity matters because it suggests confidence rather than hope. When coaches speak in generalities, they're protecting themselves from commitment. When they start identifying particular strengths, they're revealing that evaluation has moved beyond surface-level observation. Stefanski's recent comments suggest he's seen enough to form opinions that go beyond cautious optimism. He's identifying traits that matter to him specifically, traits that align with what he values in quarterback play. Equally telling is what Stefanski hasn't said. He hasn't rushed to shut down speculation about quarterback changes. He hasn't insisted that decisions are locked in or predetermined. In past situations involving quarterback uncertainty, he was quicker to close doors publicly, managing expectations by eliminating possibilities before they grew into distractions. This time, he's leaving room, space in his answers, openings in his language. That restraint is intentional because Stefanski doesn't leave doors open accidentally. When he refuses to close one, it usually means he's still walking through it himself. His history adds context to this shift. Stefanski has been burned before by quarterbacks who appeared ready on paper but couldn't deliver when pressure mounted. He's watched talented arms stall under the weight of expectations. He's seen personalities that shined in controlled environments wilt when adversity arrived. Those experiences hardened him, made him slower to trust, slower to praise publicly, slower to commit internally. Skepticism became his default because skepticism protected him and his team from premature belief that might prove costly. When a coach with that background begins softening his language, it signals something important. It suggests he's seeing evidence that challenges his trained skepticism. It suggests the accumulation of daily proof has reached a threshold where maintaining maximum doubt becomes difficult. That doesn't mean declarations are coming. It means internal belief is forming in ways that eventually become impossible to hide completely. Perhaps the most revealing shift involves how Stefanski frames responsibility now. Earlier in evaluations, he spoke about protecting young quarterbacks from situations they weren't ready to handle. That language suggested fragility, the need to shield developing players from exposure that might damage their confidence or development timeline. Recently, he's spoken differently. Earning opportunities. Demonstrated readiness. Language that suggests trust rather than protection. That distinction matters enormously. Protection implies uncertainty about capability. Opportunity implies belief that capability exists and deserves to be tested. Coaches don't offer opportunities they don't think players are ready for because failed opportunities create problems for everyone. When Stefanski starts talking about earned opportunities, he's revealing that his evaluation has reached a stage where testing makes sense rather than risking damage. The players notice these shifts. Veterans who have been around Stefanski for years recognize when his energy changes, even if his words remain careful. They see how he interacts with different quarterbacks during practice. They notice which players he speaks to directly and which he addresses through position coaches. Those observations inform locker room dynamics in ways that influence the entire team. When a head coach's confidence starts flowing toward a particular quarterback, that confidence spreads. Stefanski's public persona remains controlled. He won't announce conclusions prematurely. He won't create headlines that become distractions. That's not how he operates, and it's not going to change regardless of what's happening internally. But his recent communication suggests internal movement that careful observers can detect. The tone has shifted. The specificity has increased. The doors remain open in ways that suggest genuine consideration rather than polite deflection. For a coach who built his reputation on measured restraint, these subtle changes speak loudly to people who understand his patterns. Something is forming in his evaluation. Something that's moving beyond cautious optimism toward something more concrete. And while he may not say it directly anytime soon, his words are already telling the story for anyone willing to listen carefully. While attention focuses on what's developing in Cleveland, equally important signals are emerging from Boulder. The moves coming out of Colorado don't look like a program patiently waiting for its star quarterback to return for another season. They look like a program preparing for transition and doing it with unusual urgency. That timing raises questions that connect directly to the situation unfolding with the Browns. After last season exposed significant weaknesses in the trenches, Colorado's response wasn't cosmetic adjustment. It was structural overhaul. The transfer portal became the primary mechanism for addressing vulnerabilities, with emphasis on veteran players who could contribute immediately rather than prospects requiring development time. Experienced offensive linemen. Defensive players with proven track records. Contributors who understand physicality at the college level and don't need seasons to adjust. That approach sends a clear message even without official statements. Programs don't typically rebuild this aggressively unless they're planning ahead. They don't prioritize immediate impact over long-term development unless they understand their window and recognize that time is limited. Colorado's strategy suggests foresight rather than reaction. It suggests an organization that knows success, creates turnover, and prepares for departures before they become emergencies. The timing of these moves is difficult to dismiss as coincidence. As Cleveland grows increasingly comfortable with what it's evaluating, Colorado is reinforcing the foundation beneath its future. Two different levels of football responding to the same reality. A quarterback whose trajectory is forcing decisions earlier than comfortable timelines would prefer. And a program that appears to recognize that holding on indefinitely isn't realistic regardless of preference. Shedeur Sanders has never been someone who sugarcoats situations. His public comments after last season were blunt assessments of what needed improvement. The team got pushed around physically. The trenches weren't good enough. No scheme or playmaker could overcome those fundamental deficiencies. That honesty reflected understanding of what actually matters in football. Talent at skill positions means nothing if the offensive line can't protect and the defensive line can't pressure. Everything starts up front. The portal activity that followed aligned with those assessments. Colorado targeted specific positions with specific profiles, not projects, not gambles on potential. Players with demonstrated capability to perform immediately at required levels. That approach reflects urgency that goes beyond normal program building. It reflects awareness that the current window matters and that preparing for the next phase has to happen simultaneously. Recruiting messaging has shifted as well. Less emphasis on star power and visibility, more emphasis on need-based targeting and immediate contribution opportunities. The tone has become more pragmatic, focused on assembling functional units rather than collecting individual talents. That shift mirrors what successful programs across college football are doing, but it also suggests Colorado understands that maintaining competitiveness requires different strategies than building initial excitement. The program isn't acting desperate or panicked. There's strategy behind these moves, calculation about what positions matter most and what players fit specific needs. But there's also acceptance embedded in the approach. Acceptance that the player who elevated Colorado's visibility and success won't be there forever. Acceptance that building for what comes next is responsible leadership rather than pessimistic thinking. This connects directly to the Cleveland situation because programs don't prepare for departures they don't see coming. Colorado's actions suggest they're reading the landscape honestly. They see what's developing at the professional level. They understand the timeline and trajectory. Rather than clinging to hope that circumstances might change, they're positioning themselves to remain competitive regardless of what decisions get made elsewhere. For observers trying to understand where things stand with Shedeur Sanders, Colorado's behavior provides useful information. The program isn't fighting to retain him through public campaigns or emotional appeals. They're building around his eventual departure in ways that respect both his future and their own. That approach suggests shared understanding about what's coming, even if nothing has been announced officially. The parallel narratives reinforce each other. Cleveland is evaluating a quarterback who looks increasingly ready for professional responsibilities. Colorado is reinforcing a roster that needs to function when that quarterback leaves. Both organizations are moving toward the same conclusion from different directions, preparing for a future that connects them through one player's journey. None of this confirms anything definitively. Decisions remain unmade. Announcements remain ungiven. The future remains officially uncertain even as preparation proceeds. But when you see a program behaving as though departure is inevitable rather than contingent, that behavior tells a story. And Colorado's story right now is one of preparation rather than persuasion. They're not trying to keep Sanders from leaving. They're getting ready for what happens when he does. That distinction matters because it reveals how the people closest to the situation are reading circumstances. They see what's developing. They understand the implications. And they're responding with actions rather than words. Sometimes the clearest signal about where things are heading comes not from the principals involved, but from those preparing for the consequences. Colorado's offseason suggests they've already seen what others are still debating. Hovering over everything unfolding in Cleveland is a contract that refuses to disappear. Deshaun Watson doesn't need to take a single snap for the pressure to follow him everywhere. His presence shapes every conversation about the franchise's future, whether he's on the field or watching from the sideline. And that shadow creates complications that no evaluation of other quarterbacks can completely escape. The investment says franchise cornerstone. A fully guaranteed contract said long-term commitment when it was signed. That financial structure was designed to eliminate doubt and demonstrate organizational belief. But football decisions aren't made purely on spreadsheets and contractual obligations. They're made in locker rooms where players evaluate leadership daily. They're made in meeting rooms where coaches assess who gives the team its best chance. They're made in moments where the gap between investment and production becomes impossible to ignore. Watson's tenure in Cleveland hasn't produced the results the organization expected when it made that historic commitment. Injuries have limited his availability. Performance when healthy hasn't reached the dominant levels that justified the investment. There haven't been enough moments where he seized control of games and made everyone confident they had their franchise quarterback. Instead, there's been uncertainty, questions, situations where the offense looked for answers that weren't clearly provided. Reports suggest the front office isn't unified on Watson's future. Some voices within the organization believe he deserves more time, arguing that injuries prevented fair evaluation and that a healthy season with continuity could reveal the player they thought they were acquiring. Others, according to league sources, have started exploring alternatives and exit strategies. Nothing confirmed publicly, nothing official, but enough internal disagreement that the dysfunction itself becomes a problem. That lack of alignment creates instability that affects everyone. When an organization can't agree on its most expensive player, that disagreement radiates outward. Other roster decisions get delayed because long-term planning requires clarity at quarterback. Coaching evaluations become complicated because it's difficult to judge staff performance when the most important position remains unresolved. The entire franchise exists in a holding pattern, waiting for resolution that hasn't arrived. The fan base reflects similar division. Watson still has supporters who argue patience, pointing to talent that remains evident when he's healthy and in rhythm. Others see a massive financial commitment with limited return and question how much longer it can be defended. Social media discussions have become repetitive and exhausting, the same arguments cycling endlessly without resolution. Every image of Watson on the sideline becomes symbolic, not just of his status, but of the franchise's uncertainty about its direction. What makes this situation particularly volatile is timing. Younger quarterbacks are pushing for opportunities, including Sanders, whose development is forcing the organization to consider futures that don't center on Watson. The coaching staff faces its own scrutiny, with job security potentially dependent on quarterback decisions they don't fully control. Every day that passes without clarity creates more pressure on decisions that will eventually have to be made. Watson's contract structure complicates potential exits significantly. The guaranteed money means any separation comes with massive financial consequences. Trading him requires finding a partner willing to absorb that obligation, and the market for quarterbacks with his baggage and cap implications isn't robust. Releasing him creates dead money situations that limit roster flexibility for years. There are no clean solutions, only difficult choices with varying degrees of difficulty. Meanwhile, Watson's presence affects how other quarterbacks in the room view their situations. If the organization remains committed to Watson despite performance questions, what does that mean for someone like Sanders who's showing development and earning trust? If the commitment is wavering, what signals should players read about their own futures? The uncertainty creates an environment where everyone is calculating rather than simply competing. That's not healthy for any organization trying to build championship culture. The best teams in football have clarity at quarterback. They know who they're building around, and they construct everything else to maximize that player's success. Cleveland doesn't have that clarity. It has questions layered on questions, complicated by financial structures and past decisions that limit current options. And until that fundamental issue gets resolved, everything else remains provisional. What makes Watson's situation relevant to the Sanders evaluation is the contrast it provides. Sanders represents potential clarity, a path forward that isn't burdened by past commitments or complicated financial obligations. A fresh start that could allow the organization to align around a single direction. That potential is appealing precisely because the current situation offers no clear path. None of this is Watson's fault entirely. Injuries happen. Circumstances evolve. Past decisions can't be undone. But the reality of his contract and his production creates a dynamic that affects every other quarterback conversation. He's simultaneously the most expensive player on the roster and potentially not the most trusted. That contradiction can't sustain itself indefinitely. Eventually, Cleveland will have to choose. The delay in choosing is itself a choice, one that extends uncertainty and prevents the organization from moving forward with conviction. And until that choice gets made, the shadow remains. The footage didn't go viral because of spectacular plays. It spread because of what it felt like. On a practice day that most teams treat as routine, the field in Cleveland transformed into something heavier. Snow falling steadily, cold air muffling sound, players moving through drills with an energy that didn't match typical mid-season intensity. And right in the middle of it all stood Shedeur Sanders, executing reps with a calm that seemed to carry a message nobody was saying out loud. Every throw was sharp but restrained. No extra flair designed to impress observers. No desperation to manufacture moments that might generate attention. Just clean mechanics, deliberate movement, and focused execution that felt strangely conclusive. This wasn't a quarterback fighting for opportunity. This looked like a quarterback finishing something. The kind of body language that emerges when someone has already processed an outcome privately and doesn't feel the need to narrate it publicly. The cameras captured moments that spoke louder than statistics. Sanders on the sideline between reps, helmet in hand, eyes forward, expression unreadable. Not upset, not frustrated, not desperate for attention. Just present, calm, and somehow distant. The kind of look players get when their focus has already shifted beyond the immediate environment. Fans watching recognized the posture immediately, even if they couldn't articulate exactly why it felt significant. His media interactions reinforced that impression. Recent comments have been careful, professional, and notably closed off. Preparation, team focus, taking it one day at a time. Nothing wrong with the words themselves. It was the absence of everything else that stood out. Earlier in evaluations, Sanders spoke with edge. He backed himself publicly. He projected the confidence that quarterbacks are expected to display. That energy has disappeared, replaced by something that looks more like completion than competition. When reporters pressed about the future, he didn't dodge aggressively or deny anything emphatically. He simply didn't engage. No confirmation, no denial. Just redirection that suggested the question wasn't relevant to him anymore. Players who believe they're staying usually fight for reassurance. They want affirmation that their work is being noticed and valued. Players who are uncertain usually leak frustration. They reveal through body language and tone that the situation feels precarious. Sanders did neither. He looked like someone who had already made peace with what comes next. That kind of restraint requires confidence most young players don't possess. In a league where noise dominates every conversation, silence stands out dramatically. It suggests a player protecting his next chapter rather than campaigning for his current one. It suggests someone whose mental energy has already moved forward, even if official announcements remain weeks or months away. The specific moments that stuck with observers weren't dramatic. They were subtle. The way he interacted with teammates suggested appreciation rather than uncertainty. Quick exchanges that felt like acknowledgement of shared experience. Body language that read as gratitude rather than anxiety. Those signals typically appear when endings are approaching, when people sense transitions coming and respond by valuing present moments differently. Social media responded to the footage with unusual consensus. The debate shifted from performance analysis to departure speculation. Not when will he prove himself, but when will the announcement come? That transition in public conversation reflected what people were seeing and feeling. Something had changed. The vibe around Sanders no longer felt like evaluation. It felt like conclusion approaching at its own pace. Within the building, similar observations were likely being made by people who spend every day with these players. Coaches notice when energy shifts. Teammates sense when someone's mind has moved elsewhere. Staff members pick up on differences in engagement that outsiders might miss. Those internal observations matter because they influence how organizations prepare for transitions. If people inside the building are reading the same signals fans detected in that footage, planning is already underway. The snow kept falling during that practice. The reps kept coming. And somehow the accumulation of both felt symbolic. Layers building, time passing. A chapter approaching its final pages without dramatic confrontation or formal announcement. Just quiet acceptance of what the situation had become. That's how endings often arrive in professional football. Not with press conferences and official statements. With moments like this one. Quiet practices on cold days. Body language that speaks when words don't. The gradual recognition that what's happening now is less important than what comes next. Whether the organization has reached the same conclusion remains unclear. Official positions stay guarded. Messaging remains controlled. Decisions remain officially unmade. But Sanders appears to have reached conclusions of his own. His demeanor suggests someone who has processed the evaluation, understood the outcome, and started preparing for the next phase. For a player who arrived with enormous expectations and unprecedented attention, that kind of measured acceptance represents growth beyond football. He's not fighting the timeline or demanding resolution. He's simply continuing to work while waiting for what he already seems to know is coming. And that patience, that quiet confidence, might be the most impressive thing he's demonstrated yet. Zooming out from the quarterback-specific drama reveals something larger and more troubling. What's really happening in Cleveland is an organization caught between identities, unsure which direction to commit toward, and suffering the consequences of that indecision in ways that compound daily. The Browns aren't just evaluating quarterbacks. They're confronting fundamental questions about who they want to be as a franchise. And until those questions get answered, every smaller decision exists in a state of provisional uncertainty. On the field, the signs appear everywhere. Units executing assignments without synchronization. Drives that start with intent and purpose but end without conviction or finish. Play calling that feels cautious when aggression might be warranted. It's not a lack of effort. These players are trying. It's a lack of alignment. Everyone is moving in directions that don't quite connect. That's what organizations look like when leadership hasn't unified around a shared vision. Off the field, the dynamics feel equally fractured. Messaging from the top is controlled and guarded in ways that prevent clarity rather than create it. Press conferences offer reflection instead of direction. The language is professional but empty of the conviction that builds belief. There's no rallying cry emerging from leadership. No us against the world energy that typically surfaces when organizations believe they're on the right path. Everything feels provisional, temporary, like decisions are being delayed rather than made. Fans sense it. Not with anger anymore, but with exhaustion. The constant wait-and-see approach has drained the energy that passionate fan bases need to sustain investment. People aren't demanding championships or perfection. They're asking for something simpler. Clarity, a direction the organization commits to pursuing. Because the middle ground, the endless evaluation without conclusion, is where momentum goes to die. And Cleveland has been stuck in that middle ground for too long. The quarterback situation exemplifies the larger problem but doesn't fully explain it. Yes, uncertainty at that position creates ripple effects throughout the organization. But the hesitancy to make decisions extends beyond quarterback. It shows up in coaching evaluations that seem incomplete. In roster construction choices that hedge rather than commit. In public communications that say nothing while appearing to say something. The franchise is paused while everything around it keeps moving. Reports of internal disagreements surface regularly without official confirmation or denial. Whispers about structural review. Terms like long-term vision getting used without explanation of what that vision actually contains. Those patterns suggest an organization that knows change is necessary, but can't agree on what that change should look like. That disagreement paralyses action and extends uncertainty indefinitely. The contrast with successful franchises is striking and painful. Teams that win consistently don't operate this way. They identify their quarterback and build around him aggressively. They make difficult decisions quickly rather than delaying indefinitely. They communicate with conviction that creates organizational belief. They move forward even when moving forward involves risk because standing still involves greater risk over time. Cleveland appears stuck in analysis, evaluating options without selecting them, considering changes without implementing them, talking about future plans without committing to the work those plans require. That kind of organizational paralysis feels safe in the moment because no decision means no accountability for wrong decisions. But the cumulative cost is enormous. Momentum dies, belief fades. Talented people start looking elsewhere for opportunities with clearer paths. What makes this moment potentially pivotal is the opportunity it represents. The Sanders evaluation has provided something Cleveland rarely experiences. A genuine option at quarterback that wasn't manufactured through desperation or forced through crisis. Someone who emerged through legitimate development and proved himself through accumulating evidence. The organization could seize that opportunity and align around it, creating clarity that would radiate throughout everything else. Or they could continue evaluating indefinitely, waiting for certainty that never arrives while opportunities pass and windows close. That's the choice facing Cleveland right now. Not just about quarterbacks, about identity, about what kind of organization they want to be and whether they have the conviction to commit to becoming it. The players who perform in this environment deserve recognition for their professionalism. Maintaining focus and effort when direction feels unclear requires maturity that not everyone possesses. But professionalism alone doesn't win games or build culture. It needs to be paired with organizational conviction that gives meaning to daily work. That conviction has been missing, and everyone inside the building feels its absence. Until Cleveland commits to a direction, every snap and every press conference and every decision will carry the same unresolved tension. The franchise will remain paused. Progress will remain theoretical, and the questions will continue multiplying while answers get postponed. The path forward requires courage more than certainty, making decisions with imperfect information, committing to directions that involve risk, trusting evaluations and acting on them rather than endlessly seeking more data. Cleveland has the information it needs. What it needs now is the conviction to use it. That conviction might be forming. The signs discussed throughout this story suggest movement toward clarity, but until movement becomes action, possibility remains just that. And Cleveland has been stuck in possibility for too long. What if the Cleveland Browns already solved their quarterback problem and almost nobody noticed when it happened? Not through a blockbuster trade or a headline-generating draft pick. Through the accumulation of daily evidence that adds up to something undeniable. Through habits that don't trend on social media but resonate deeply inside NFL buildings. Through trust formed in practice reps and film sessions and moments when nobody was watching except the people whose opinions actually matter. Belief at this level doesn't announce itself. It forms in fragments, clean throws, calm responses to adversity, teammates finishing routes harder because they trust the ball will be there, coaches expanding responsibility incrementally because evidence demands it. Those pieces stack up over weeks and months until suddenly the conversation shifts without anyone pinpointing exactly when it happened. That's what appears to be unfolding now. Not a coronation, not a guarantee, just a pattern becoming impossible to ignore. And whether the world realizes it today or months from now, the foundation is already being laid. The question everyone should be asking isn't whether Shedeur Sanders can play at this level. The question is what happens when a franchise that's been searching finally believes it might have found what it was looking for all along.